Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to crack open complex topics and really pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're tackling a huge one, a really big puzzle facing global industry. How two vital transport sectors, maritime shipping and aviation, are trying to decarbonize, trying to go green. We're going to dive deep into a fascinating study called Comparing Sustainable Fuel Adoption in the Energy Transition for Maritime and Aviation Transport.
It's a critical area, absolutely. These sectors are, well, notoriously difficult to clean up.
Right, they rely so heavily on these incredibly energy-dense fuels, don't they? And you can't just plug a giant container ship or a long-haul plane into a socket. Direct electrification just isn't feasible for the distances they cover.
Exactly. The energy requirements are massive, but the pressure is really mounting.
It sure is. I mean, each sector, shipping and aviation, currently accounts for about 2% of total global CO2 emissions from energy use, which maybe doesn't sound like that much on its own.
But here's the kicker. If we don't take serious action, their combined share could absolutely skyrocket. We're talking maybe 40% of global emissions by 2050.
40%. That's staggering. It really puts it in perspective. Think about it, if global shipping and aviation were a country, they'd be like a top 10 emitter worldwide.
That scale tells you everything about the challenge.
So this study, comparing sustainable fuel adoption in the energy transition for maritime and aviation transport, it's really trying to fill a gap, isn't it? By looking at these two hard-to-abate sectors side by side.
Precisely. It looks for common ground, common challenges, but also, crucially, the differences. Sector-specific differences in how they might transition to these green e-fuels.
And e-fuels, meaning fuels made from renewable electricity and sustainable CO2, right?
That's the one, produced synthetically. The goal of the study is essentially to figure out the most cost-effective options fuels, propulsion systems for each sector as they navigate this huge shift.
Okay, let's unpack this. What are the international bodies actually doing? Are there concrete goals?
Oh, yes. Things are moving. It's fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
For maritime, you've got the International Maritime Organization, the IMO. They've set some really ambitious goals.
Like what?
They're aiming for net zero greenhouse gas emissions close to 2050. That's the big target. But there are steps along the way. A 20–30% reduction by 2030, then 70–80% by 2040.
Compared to
2008 levels.
Yeah.
And they're pushing hard on energy efficiency, but also expecting these zero or near zero emission fuels to make up at least 5%, hopefully 10% of the energy ships used by 2030.
10% by 2030. That's really soon.
It is. It shows the urgency.
And aviation, they're not just watching from the sidelines, I assume.
Not at all. You've got IATA, the International Air Transport Association, and ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization.
Oh.
They've also committed to net zero by mid-century.
Okay, similar timeline. Any specific targets for fuels?
Yes, very specific ones for sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. They want SAF to cover 2% of total fuel needs by 2025. That's basically now scaling up to 65% by 2050. Plus, they expect contributions from electricity and hydrogen, too.
65% SAF by 2050 is huge.
It is. And regional players are adding pressure. Look at the EU's Fit for 55 package. It's extending their emissions trading system, the ETS, to cover shipping now. That's a big deal.
Right, putting a price on maritime emissions.
Exactly. And they have specific regulations, Fuel EU Maritime and Refuel EU Aviation. These actually mandate minimum shares for SF and e-fuels. For instance, by 2030, 1.2% of all aviation fuel in the EU must be e-fuels.
Wow, a mandate, not just a target.
A mandate.
Yeah.
And that jumps to 35% e-fuels by 2050. So these aren't just suggestions, they're becoming law.
Okay, so ambitious goals, policy drivers, but let's get back to the core challenge. What makes these sectors so uniquely difficult? You mentioned energy density. What else do they have in common that lumps them into this hard-to-abate bucket?
Well, besides the fundamental physics problem of energy density, batteries at maybe 250 watt-hours per kilogram versus liquid fuels at 12,000.
A massive gap, yeah. Nearly 50 times difference.
Right, that rules out easy electrification for long hauls. That's why they're hard to abate. And despite getting more fuel efficient over the years, both sectors have just seen massive growth. More ships, more planes, more travel, more trade. So demand and emissions have kept rising.
Growth counteracting efficiency gains.
Pretty much. And another key thing is their governance. They aren't covered by the standard Paris Agreement national commitments, the NDCs. They have their own international bodies, IMO and ICAO, which operate differently. Different structures, different politics involved.
Adds another layer of complexity for global coordination, I imagine.
Definitely.
What about the practical stuff? Infrastructure, investment risk.
Huge factors. Both sectors need entirely new infrastructure for alternatives like hydrogen, ammonia, or methanol. We're talking new storage at ports and airports, new fueling systems, whole new supply chains.
Sounds expensive.
Very. And then there's the stranded asset risk. Ships and planes cost a fortune and last for decades. If you invest billions in, say, an ammonia-powered fleet, and then 5 years later, everyone decides hydrogen fuel cells are the way to go.
Your ammonia ships could become worthless long before they're paid off.
Exactly. That's a massive risk hanging over investment decisions right now. Makes companies hesitant.
But is there any good news? Any overlap?
There is some. This study points out that some potential fuels could work for both sectors. Things like biofuels, certain e-fuels like Fischer-Tropsch liquids, hydrogen itself, maybe even electricity for shorter routes.
So potential synergies there.
Potentially. For example, if you're making e-kerosene for planes using a power-to-liquids process, you often get other fuel fractions, like diesel, as a byproduct. Maybe that e-diesel could fuel ships.
Yeah.
It's about looking for those cross-sector efficiencies.
Right, okay. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's dig into the sector specifics. Starting with maritime. What did this study find is the most cost-effective green option for ships, especially considering that stranded asset risk you mentioned?
Okay, so this study used this metric, LCOM levelized cost of mobility. Basically, the total cost to move a standard container, a TEU, 1,000 kilometers.
Got it. All costs included.
Right. And for maritime, the results were quite diverse. If you don't include the cost of emissions, sort of a hypothetical scenario now.
Where pollution is free, yeah. Which isn't reality anyway.
Exactly. But in that scenario, e-ammonia or e-LNG burned in regular internal combustion engines looked cheapest, around 17.3 to 17.5 euros per container per 1,000 kilometers in 2030.
That sounds surprisingly low, actually.
It does. But, and this is the crucial, but what happens when you factor in the cost of polluting, when you internalize those emission costs?
Which is happening with things like the EU ETS expanding.
Absolutely. And when you do that, the picture flips. Hydrogen fuel cells, specifically PEMFCs, proton exchange membrane fuel cells, they become the clear winner for maritime.
Really? Even though fuel cells are generally more expensive up front?
Yes. In 2030, the study estimates the LKM for a ship using e-hydrogen in a PEMFC is about 21.2 euros per TEU per 1,000 kilometers. But here's the key. By 2050, that cost drops significantly, down to just 13.3 euros.
Wow, that's a big drop. Why?
Efficiency. Fuel cells are much more efficient than combustion engines. So while the initial ship cost might be higher, you save massively on fuel over the ship's lifetime. And when fuel is expensive and emissions are taxed, that efficiency pays off big time.
That makes sense. Lower running costs outweigh higher initial investment.
Exactly, especially over decades. And the study was also clear that e-diesel, consistently the most expensive green option for shipping no matter how you slice it, fuel costs are just dominant in shipping, making up like 43% to nearly 80% of the total cost when you include emissions. So the fuel choice is absolutely critical.
Okay, a strong pointer towards hydrogen fuel cells for shipping, driven by efficiency and emissions pricing. Now, let's pivot to aviation. What did the study find there? Is it a similar story?
No, quite different actually. For aviation, the viable green options seem much more limited, at least based on this analysis.
How so?
Well, the study mainly looked at two paths, using e-kerosene, which is basically synthetic jet fuel in existing types of aircraft.
The drop-in solution.
Right. And the other path was using e-hydrogen, probably requiring completely new aircraft designs with different engines and fuel tanks.
And the winner was?
E-kerosene. Pretty clearly. The study found that using e-kerosene in conventional planes has the lowest costs. And that holds true regardless of the year, 2030 or 2050, and whether or not you factor in emission pricing.
So even with carbon pricing, e-kerosene beats hydrogen in the air?
Yes. In 2030, the LCOM for an e-kerosene flight was estimated around 89 euros per passenger per 1,000 kilometers. For a hydrogen plane, almost 200 euros, more than double.
Double the cost per passenger. Why such a huge difference? Hydrogen is zero emission at the point of use.
It is, but several factors play in. While fossil kerosene starts cheaper, by 2050, with higher carbon prices, e-kerosene becomes cheaper than fossil. But hydrogen planes, they remain the most expensive, even with projected cost reductions for the planes themselves.
So the gap stays wide.
Very wide, according to this study. A key difference from shipping is the overall cost structure in aviation. Fuel is a smaller proportion of the total cost compared to shipping. Things like the aircraft cost, maintenance, airport fees, crew costs, they play a much bigger role.
Ah, okay.
And currently, hydrogen plane designs often carry fewer passengers because the hydrogen tanks are bulky, taking up space. But the plane might still face similar airport landing fees, handling charges, etc. So spread over fewer passengers, the cost per person goes way up. The basic economics just don't seem to favor hydrogen aircraft yet on a large scale.
Right. So summarizing the findings. For maritime, it's a diverse picture, but hydrogen fuel cells look like a strong contender long-term, especially with emission costs. For aviation, e-kerosene seems the more practical, cost-effective route for now, fitting into existing systems. Very different outcomes.
Very different. Yes.
So, given these distinct paths, what are the big overarching hurdles that both sectors still face? How do they actually get there?
Well, one major challenge we touched on is that lock-in effect, especially for shipping, with ships lasting over 20 years on average.
Makes choosing the right tech path today absolutely critical. You don't want those stranded assets.
Exactly. It's less severe for aviation, partly because planes have shorter lifespans on average, and critically because e-kerosene is a drop-in fuel. You don't need entirely new planes or airport infrastructure immediately. That makes the transition much less disruptive operationally.
That's a huge advantage for e-kerosene. But what about just producing enough of these green fuels? The sheer volume needed must be immense. Oh, colossal. Absolutely colossal. Meeting the projected demand for both sectors means a massive scale-up of renewable electricity. We're talking huge amounts of wind and solar. Plus, a massive increase in hydrogen production capacity, electrolyzers, and the facilities to actually synthesize the e-fuels.
An industrial transformation, really.
Truly. And there's a real risk of competition for that renewable power and hydrogen, not just between shipping and aviation, but with other industries trying to decarbonize too, like steel or chemicals, and competition between countries.
And who pays for building all these multi-billion-dollar e-fuel plants?
That's the crux of it. As the study points out, there isn't really a solid business case for investing in huge e-fuel production right now without strong policy support and clear economic incentives. The tech, like electrolyzers, is mature, but the investment won't flow at scale without market certainty.
But the study's analysis showed that with emission pricing, fossil fuels get priced out eventually. Yes, the sensitivity analysis confirmed that. Including emission costs makes fossil fuels increasingly uncompetitive. That is a powerful market signal, but getting the price high enough, globally and predictably, is the political challenge.
Are there other, maybe less obvious challenges? Social, political?
Definitely.
Right.
Sociopolitical factors are huge. You've got lobbying from established fossil fuel interests, obviously, but you also see growing public pressure. Think about the movement in some countries to restrict short-haul flights because of emissions.
Right, flight shame and policy responses.
Exactly. It shows how public opinion and societal pressure can force change if industries don't meet environmental expectations. Infrastructure is another one, especially for the new maritime fuels like ammonia and hydrogen. Ports need major upgrades for bunkering.
Although you mentioned many ports already handle these as cargo.
They do handle them as chemicals, yeah, so
Yeah.
the basic know-how exists. It's more about scaling up the infrastructure specifically for fueling ships, which is a different logistical setup.
And finally, just proving these technologies work reliably in the real world.
Absolutely. We need more large-scale, real-world trials. There are promising pilot projects happening for both ships and planes, testing ammonia engines, hydrogen fuel cells, SAF blends, showing good performance and operational feasibility.
Yeah.
But scaling from a pilot to powering thousands of ships and planes globally, that's the giant leap we still need to make.
So lots of progress, lots of challenges still ahead. What does this all mean for you, the listener? As you think about the future of how goods get to you, how you might travel, we've taken a deep dive today into sustainable fuels for shipping and aviation, guided by the study comparing sustainable fuel adoption and the energy transition from maritime and aviation transport. And it shows two quite different potential futures emerging. For shipping, a complex picture may be e-ammonia or e-LNG if we ignore pollution costs, but more likely, hydrogen fuel cells winning out as emissions get properly priced, a potentially radical shift for ships.
Well, for aviation, the path looks, for now at least, much more focused on e-kerosene. It fits existing planes, existing airports, making it a more practical, though still expensive drop-in solution. Hydrogen planes remain a longer-term, much pricier prospect.
So what stands out most to you as you hear about these different strategies, how these two huge, vital global industries are trying to decarbonize? And maybe think about the ripple effects on the cost of everything you buy, on how we connect across the world in the coming decades. That's all for this deep dive. We look forward to diving into another topic with you again soon.